Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
Quote, MLK Jr. was the 1960s George Floyd, and his quote-unquote holiday should be ended and tossed into the seventh circle of hell where it belongs, unquote. These were the words of Paul Ingrassia, who the Trump administration nominated to head up the Office of Special Counsel. In a story for Political, Daniel Lippman spoke with multiple sources about a text thread that involved Ingrassia and a half dozen Republican operatives and influencers. Ingrassia went on to say, quote, no Moulignon holidays, from Kwanzaa to MLK Jr. Day to Black History Month to Juneteenth. He said, quote, every single one needs to be eviscerated, unquote. As they were talking about the Democrats turning black people into victims, Ingrassia wrote, quote, blacks behave that way because that's their natural state. You can't change them, unquote. He said, proof, all of Africa is a shithole and will always be that way, unquote. Regarding Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, Ingrassia texted, never trust a Chinaman or Indian, and then followed up in all caps, never. At one point, someone in the chat wrote, Paul belongs in the Hitler Youth with Obergruppenführer Stephen Bannon, to which Ingrassia responded, I do have a Nazi streak in me from time to time, I will admit it. He said that whites built this country. He said, quote, we should celebrate white men and Western civilization, and I will never back down from that. He added, quote, we need competent white men in positions of leadership. The founding fathers were wrong that all men are created equal. We need to reject that part of our heritage, unquote. And his words haven't just been in private texts. He posted publicly on X in December 2023, quote, exceptional white men are not only the builders of Western civilization, but are the ones most capable of appreciating the fruits of our heritage, unquote. So how did Ingrassia's lawyer, Edward Andrew Paltzik, respond? He said the texts have material context omitted and are clearly read as a self-deprecating and satirical humor making fun of the fact that liberals outlandishly and routinely call MAGA supporters Nazis. Also, Ingrassia isn't the only one saying these types of things. 6 days earlier, on October 14th, 2025, Political reported on a young Republican group chat that, quote, referred to black people as monkeys and the watermelon people and mused about putting their political opponents in gas chambers. They talked about raping their enemies and driving them to suicide and lauded Republicans who they believed support slavery, unquote. The Kansas Vice Chair, William Hendricks, used the N-word over a dozen times. The New York State Vice Chair called rape epic. And Peter Guinta, another chairman, said, quote, everyone that votes no is going to the gas chamber, and added, quote, I'm going to create some of the greatest physiological torture methods known to man. We only want true believers. Can we fix the showers? Gas chambers don't fit the Hitler aesthetic, the general counsel for the New York State Republicans, Joe Maligno, said. And another responded, I'm ready to watch people burn now. To which Maligno responded, we gotta pretend that we like them. Hey, come on in, take a nice shower and relax. Boom, they're dead. So while all the offensive things Charlie Kirk said about women and black people were supposedly taken out of context, and while all the offensive things Ingrassia said were supposedly taken out of context, how is the Trump administration responding to these words? Are these words finally crossing a line that Kirk and Ingrassia didn't cross? Here's Vice President J.D. Vance responding.
By focusing on what kids are saying in a group chat, grow up. I'm sorry. Focus on the real issues. Don't focus on what kids say in group chats. But there's another angle to this that I just have to be honest about. I mean, I'm like an old guy at this point. I'm 41 years old. I have 3 kids. I grew up in a different world, right? Where not most of the stupid things that I did when I was a teenager and a young adult, they're not on the internet. Like, I'm going to tell my kids, especially my boys, don't put things on the internet. Like, be careful with what you post. If you put something in a group chat, assume that some scumbag is going to leak it in an effort to try to cause you harm or cause your family harm. But the reality is that kids do stupid things, especially young boys. They tell edgy, offensive jokes. Like, that's what kids do. And I really don't want us to grow up in a country where a kid telling a stupid joke, telling a very offensive stupid joke, is cause to ruin their lives. And at some point, we're all going to have to say, enough of this BS. We're not going to allow the worst moment in a 21-year-old's group chat to ruin a kid's life for the rest of time. That's just not okay. Like, we live in a digital world. This stuff is now etched in stone online. We're all going to have to say, you know what? No. We're not doing this. We're not canceling kids because they do something stupid in a group chat.
Notice how he didn't say the scumbag is the person who types racist and Nazi propaganda, but the person who leaked and warned about it. He also plays the line that they were just joking. And he calls them kids. But these weren't kids. They were Republican officials in their 20s and 30s. And while many people are just now discussing these text threads due to these comments being leaked over the past week by Politico, this isn't breaking news to those who have been paying attention. And it's not merely the in-the-moment reactionary politics of people who are anti-Trump or never-Trumpers. Scholars have been concerned about the Nazi language of young white male Christian Republicans for a while. Last month, I attended an event at the Candler School of Theology called Pastoral Leadership in a Time of Christian Nationalism. In episode 61, I shared the audio of Matthew D. Taylor's sermon at that event about preaching the gospel in an era of Christian power. One of the other speakers at the event was historian Kristen Kobes-Dumais, author of the best-selling book Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. And during her presentation, Dumais shared some of the background that led to her writing the book. I've heard her share this story a number of times on a number of different platforms, and it's quite relevant for us to listen to here because of the Nazi language that we're hearing from young white Republican Christian men. She started her presentation by sharing how in the early 2000s she was lecturing on Teddy Roosevelt, when some students came up to her after class and recommended that she read John Eldridge's Wild at Heart book that presented a very militaristic view of Christianity and what it means to be a man. But she eventually set her study aside until the fall of 2016. And after the release of the Access Hollywood tapes, people began to wonder how white evangelicals could betray their values and support Trump. But as Dumais recalls, she said, quote, "This was not a betrayal of values. We needed to better understand what some of these core values actually were." So here's Dumais finishing the story from here.
So I went back to those old files, dug back to 2006 was when I had set the project aside. And I wrote a piece, and I published it online with Religion and Politics, an online journal, and they timed it to Trump's 2017 inauguration. And the piece went viral. And you're not supposed to read the comments, I know, but I do. And what I saw over and over again was white evangelical men commenting and saying, "This is true. I have stories to tell." And it was those voices that made me decide to go further with the project. In the days after that piece published, I received an email from a scholar of Nazi propaganda. And in the piece, I had included a lot of quotes from these white evangelical men on masculinity, on gender, on politics. And he said, "Do you know that every single one of these quotes could have come directly from the German Christian movement under Hitler?" And I responded to him, "Yes, I know." Because I lived in Germany. I was a German major. My outside field of study in graduate school was German history with a focus on the 20th century, on the Holocaust, and on the German Christian movement. I never expected my outside field would come to bear on my primary field of American religious history.
Remember, when these scholars were becoming concerned about the Nazi-like rhetoric of these young white Christian conservative men, they didn't have access to these private chat groups that Politico just leaked out over the past week. And they weren't reacting in some kind of partisan way against Trump because these concerns were being discussed prior to Trump's first presidency. How much more concerning is it now that we're seeing these private text chats that explicitly promote Nazism being made public? Shouldn't we discuss this? Should we be concerned about how prevalent this Nazi mindset is among young white Christian Republican men? Here is President Trump and J.D. Vance shortly after the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
It's a long past time for all Americans and the media to confront the fact that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, year after year, in the most hateful and despicable way possible. For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now.
What is it that you want people to do when you call them Nazis? What is it that you want them to do when you call them fascists? What is the proper response when you say that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Charlie Kirk are threatening your safety? What do you expect people to do? This rhetoric is completely out of control, and it's part of this entire network of violence that exists on the far left.
We got to stop it. We got to condemn it. And that starts, unfortunately, at the very top of the Democratic Party. If you want to stop political violence, stop attacking our law enforcement as the Gestapo. If you want to stop political violence, stop telling your supporters that everybody who disagrees with you is a Nazi.
So apparently those causing violence aren't the people promoting Nazi language, but the people warning about it. In the world of Trump and Vance, talking about fixing the showers and saying, "I'm ready to watch people burn now," and inviting them into the shower and celebrating, boom, they're dead, isn't inciting violence. But reflecting on those comments or expressing concern about those comments is. In the political story, multiple sources wanted to remain anonymous because of the potential professional repercussions if GOP leadership knew who they were. But if the GOP is against the Nazis, why would there be any potential professional repercussions for those who expose Nazi sympathizers? If the GOP was really so vehemently opposed to the Nazis, wouldn't exposing Nazis be deserving of a promotion in the party? I think the reality here is quite clear for those of us who have any integrity to consider the facts. The reason Trump and Vance demonize those who talk about Nazi comparisons, and the reason these whistleblowers are concerned about their names being attached to exposing Nazi sympathizers, is that the far right has become infiltrated with Nazi sympathizers. And unfortunately, the young Republicans of today are the Republican leaders of tomorrow. Of course, I'll remind everyone that the people who were posting these Nazi sympathetic comments in these private chats were not kids. They were adults. But the point still remains that unless we confront young Republicans when they say these things, the violence they promote in private will become normalized and eventually will seep its way into Washington. Take White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, for example. Here he was talking when he was a young Republican 17-year-old.
To the issue of the Iraqi civilians, I think that as many of them should survive as possible, because the goal of any military conflict is to kill as few people as possible. But as for Saddam Hussein and his henchmen, I think the ideal solution would be to cut off their fingers. I don't think it's necessary to kill them entirely. We're not a barbaric people. We respect life. Therefore, torture is the way to go, because tortured people can live. Torture is a celebration of life and human dignity. We need to remember that as we enter these very dark and dangerous times in the next century. And I only hope that many of my peers and people who will be leading this country will appreciate the value and respect that torture shows towards other cultures. I was talking to my doctor the other day, and I said to him, well, you know, I'm 17, I'm pretty sexy. Everything's going the way I want it to. You know, I play good tennis, but something's just not going right. My hair is just receding. I look like I'm 35, and a balding 35-year-old at that. Thank you, Jonas. And he said, well, how much sleep are you getting? And I said, excuse me, what's sleep? Apparently, you're supposed to go to bed at nighttime. Usually, I sit in my room like this. Ha! 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 And then the doctor told me that this is no way to recuperate. Apparently, you're supposed to close your eyes, recline, and just drift off into some kind of slumber. So I guess that's the reason I'm losing my hair and wrinkling my forehead. Hopefully, when I go to college, I'll find some time to sleep. As that question's been finished, I'd like to do a little number. This one comes from Engelbert Humperdinck. Tonight, I cling to nothing but the feelings in my soul. My heart overflows with emotions I just can't control. There's someone you are going to, but tonight I just can't tell right from wrong. All I ask is one night till the morning sunlight. Baby, I want you here. And baby, let me be yours until tomorrow. Let me be yours until tomorrow. Let me be yours.
First off, I apologize for making you listen to his singing, but I think it's important to hear him go on like that because you can hear the seeds of who he came to be. Just 15 years later, he was serving in the first Trump administration as senior advisor to the president and the White House director of speechwriting. This is who is running our government. He said torture is the celebration of life and human dignity. And when this video was leaked by Vice in 2017, the White House spokesperson at the time, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, called it a teenage skit and another comical overreach by the media. Again, nothing to talk about here, just ignore it and pretend like it's not really happening. But NPR reached out to Ari Rosmarin, who is the editor of Stephen Miller's high school student newspaper, and Rosmarin said that Miller used to get a kick out of challenging Latino students to speak English and casting those who disagreed with him as unpatriotic. Another high school friend of Miller's said that Miller told him he no longer wanted to be his friend anymore and gave him a list of reasons, but the friend said, quote, "The one thing that really sticks out in my memory was my Latino heritage," unquote. And unfortunately, I think this racism is far more spread than many of us want to admit. For example, there were students at a local high school in my area who wanted to celebrate Charlie Kirk's birthday by wearing red to school. But their school has a dress code, which wearing red violates. So all the students who wore red that day received an in-school suspension. And then they claimed they were being persecuted and started a group chat. So one of my son's friends joined the group chat out of curiosity for what they were saying, and he said it was filled with people using the N-word. And we live in the South, but that's totally irrelevant. And there's nothing to this, right? The problem isn't the people using the N-word in the chat. It's those of us who express concern about it. But in the case of 17-year-old Stephen Miller, he was allowed to keep going. He was allowed to keep talking, and he was allowed to keep advancing within the Republican Party without addressing his racism or his delight in violence against human bodies. So now he's in the White House peddling this kind of language.
And we are going to do that under President Trump's leadership. I don't care how. It could be a RICO charge, a conspiracy charge, conspiracy against the United States, insurrection, but we are going to do what it takes to dismantle the organizations and the entities that are fomenting riots, that are doxing, that are trying to inspire terrorism, and that are committing acts of wanton violence. It has to stop. And my message is to all of the domestic terrorists in this country spreading this evil hate: you want us to live in fear? We will not live in fear, but you will live in exile. Because the power of law enforcement under President Trump's leadership will be used to find you, will be used to take away your money, take away your power, and if you've broken the law, to take away your freedom, Sean.
This whole thing is just like our episode on Monday about Trump's king language. In that story, Republicans want to talk about the United States needing a CEO dictator, while promoting policies where Trump can do whatever he wants without concern for the other branches of government or the Constitution, and where Trump can post memes and videos of himself as king. And then all the while claiming that those of us who say we don't want a king are the violent ones. It's the same thing with this Nazi rhetoric. They're the ones talking about burning people in gas showers, admitting to having a Nazi streak in them, laughing about chopping off fingers and about torture, and then all the while claiming that those of us who say this sounds like Nazi language are the violent ones. What if the people who know what they're talking about here, regarding the parallels between Nazi Germany and the Trump administration, are not the politicians like Trump and Vance and Miller who have a vested interest in power? What if the people we should be listening to are the historians and the sociologists who have been studying these topics in depth for decades. If you have been hesitant to heed the warnings of scholars like Kristen Kobes-Dumay when they warn about parallels between MAGA and Nazi rhetoric, then would you at least consider what they have to say in light of the leaked text messages from young Republicans openly embracing Nazi rhetoric? Or are you going to continue being silent bystanders while those of us who call these things out are branded by the government as violent scumbags? That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.